The parsha began with Korach, Dustin, Aviram. They're the ones who actually led the mutiny. Later, in Dvorim, the Rechaim points out that although Korach, if not for Korach leading this mutiny, they wouldn't have succeeded. They wouldn't have even begun. But nevertheless, the one who actually fueled it and spurred it on were Dustin and Aviram. They were the real culprits, Dustin and Aviram. Dustin and Aviram have been Moshe's antagonists from day one. From the day that he walked out of the palace, when he was 18 years old, when he killed the Egyptian who was beating the Jew, they're the ones who informed on him. When he rebuked him, and he said, Rosha Lomasakis Reecho. When one lifted his hand to strike the other, he said, Rosha Lomasakis Reecho. They said, since when are you a judge to judge us? Are you going to kill us as you killed the Egyptian? So he knew immediately word was out. And they went and they informed on Moshe Rabbeinu to Paro, and Moshe had to flee. And he only returned when he was 80 years old. He had to flee to Midian. And all kinds of miracles had to happen for him to be able to escape Egypt. As it says in Chazal, he was judged, and the judge became blind. The executioner became blind, and he fled. The other medrash is that his neck became like a pillar of marble, and when they tried to decapitate him, they weren't able to. That he was able to flee Egypt. Bilam had set a invisible shield around Mitzrayim that no slave, no Jew could flee from Egypt. And he was able to break through this shield and flee. Many things had to happen because Dustin Aviram had informed on Moshe Rabbeinu. I mean, whoever heard of such a thing? The only advocate the Jews have in the palace was Moshe, and they're going to destroy him. So the only chance the Jews could be in a better position is Moshe's there, but they couldn't care less. They were so into themselves, Klal Yisrael was irrelevant. So we're talking about really bad people, very bad people. I will see even more so. They take away the straw subsidy when Moshe comes back years later as the Goel. And as Moshe is going into Paro with Aaron, they're coming out and they say, you've made our position putrid in the eyes of Paro. Hashem should judge you. That's what they said to Moshe and Aaron. As a result of that very direct attack, Moshe said, it was so direct, Moshe Rabbeinu, it like rattled him that he said something which he shouldn't have said because he reacted to that. And he said to Hashem, why you bring such hardship on Klal Yisrael? And Hashem said, because of that, now you will see the redemption. You're not going into Canaan. So again, these people are bad people. Moshe Rabbeinu forfeited his right to go into Canaan because it doesn't have Aviram. The Mon, they left over. They're the ones. They went out on Shabbos to collect the money. It doesn't have Aviram. Whatever there was the problems, doesn't have Aviram. And now, finally, who's leading this mutiny against Moshe Rabbeinu? It's doesn't have Aviram. It's reaching the point now. It's at nauseum. The level of negativity these people have. These are the arch enemies of Moshe Rabbeinu. They've proven it for going back years, going back over 60 years. They're trying to destroy Moshe Rabbeinu. Afterward, what would you say? Ignore him. Just do what you have to do. You lose patience, and it's justified because these people have proved themselves to be evil. It's like you can't talk to them. But nevertheless, the Torah tells us, Pasuk Yud Beis, Yishlach Moshe Lichro L'Dosim Aviram B'nei Eliyav. He went to speak to them. He sent a message they should come see him. V'yomru lo nale. They said, we're not coming. So Rashi points out something. Why is the Torah telling us that Moshe Rabbeinu initiated this meeting? V'yishlach Moshe mikan shem machzikim machlokas. Since we're dealing with machlokas, this fractionalization of Klal Yisrael, even though he's dealing with people who represent something so negative, and he knows they're out to destroy him, but if any way you can negotiate with them and somehow diffuse this problem, you swallow your pride. There's no pride here. Moshe Rabbeinu left no stone unturned to offer smoke the peace pipe with them. This is what the Torah is telling us. When it comes to machlokes, there's no such thing as pride. You do whatever you can that there should not be machlokes. And this is pointed out. Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader of Klal Yisrael, right now he could just close the lid on them, but no, he doesn't want there should be machlokes. If we're able to diffuse it and bring peace, you bring peace. They said lo nale, we will not come up. They could have said lo novo, right? They could have said we're not coming. Lo nale means we will not ascend. Now sometimes people make a statement, and the statement speaks volumes of what really was going to happen. It's like already forecasting what the end will be. Lo nale, piyam hichshilom. The mouths actually brought about this tragedy. They were trapped due to their statement from the word michshol, shelem elu yurido, meaning from now on, it's only down. It's all downhill. There's no way coming back. When they said lo nale, they were forecasting we're not coming back. But using that word means we're at a point of no return. Why are they so enraged at Moshe Rabbeinu? Listen what their acts, what acts they're grinding over here. You took us out of land that flows with milk and honey. They're referring to Egypt. Egypt is a land that flows with milk and honey. That we should be killed in the desert due to the Chet HaMeraglim. They were condemned to die over this 40-year period. So what did you do? You took us out of a land of milk and honey, that we should die in the desert. And what is the value of all this? That only to lord over us. Yeah, you took us out of a land of milk and honey to die in the desert for the sake of lording over us. So take a look at Rashi. Hadova Musav al Omer Lamalo Kloma Lohevi Sonol Nasatolo Nachla Soda Vikerim. You didn't bring us, you didn't give us the portion, which we have a field, we have a vineyard. Marto Lono Al Eschem Mioni Mitzrayim Eretz Tova. You said you take us out of an impoverished state of Mitzrayim to bring us to a good land. Bishomot Sasono Velo Eretz Zovas Cholad Vosh have you some Gazarto Lein Lamisenu Bamidbor. But rather, it was decreed that we should die in the desert. Is in this desert, your carcasses are going to just fall. You're going to die. Now what? You had taken us out of a land of milk and honey. I mean, is Egypt a land of milk and honey? I'm talking about this with a bondage. We were there for 210 years. The Jewish children were actually thrown into the Nile. We were slaves, we were tortured, we were beaten. And they said, you took us out of a land of milk and honey to die in the desert. I mean, what are these people thinking? What's this all about? Chazal tell us, based on the Gemara, why were doesn't be able to form on Moshe initially? We find that after 60 years, Hashem says you could return. Why could you return? You could return because because the people originally informed on you, they're no longer alive. Samar asks, but we know it doesn't have the are still alive. They're alive till they're swallowed up by the earth. They were part of the mutiny against Moshe Rabbeinu, together with Korach. So what does it mean? They died. Samar says, from here we learn Ani Choshev Kemesh, that initially they were able to inform Moshe Rabbeinu because there was a wealthy class among the slaves, and they had certain relationships in the government, and they had relevance to higher echelons of government. They were able to inform. Once they became impoverished, those relationships no longer there. So Hashem says, you don't have to worry. They can't create that problem any longer. So initially they were wealthy and they became poor. Now, when they were in Egypt, they were part of the wealthy class. What about the rest? What about the rest of your brothers? They have nothing. They're being tortured and killed. You're like from the higher class. I mean, how do you not relate? You said, you took us out of Egypt, the land of milk and honey, to where? To die in the desert. That's milk and honey. It's like, God forbid, a person's in Auschwitz, and you say, I will take you to Auschwitz, and then you're stranded somewhere else. Whatever you're going to say, you're not going to say where you were before. That's milk and honey. Maybe you're in a worse situation, but it's not milk and honey. The answer is these people, they lived only for themselves. As we see, how it's unconscionable that they went and formed the Moshe Rabbeinu, where he's the only chance. He's the advocate. He's the adopted grandson of Paro. And you go and inform on him that he should be killed. I mean, how do you do it? It's like being heartless. The answer is because they believed they were the ones in power. And then all of a sudden, this young person, he's judging them. He's the new boy on the block, new kid on the block. And they're not going to be acknowledged for what they are among the masses. If that's the case, we have to take them out. But just look what you're doing. What do you look at the ramifications of what you're doing? What about the rest of the Klal Yisrael? These people live to themselves. This is proof in the pudding now. You took us out of land of milk and honey. If you could refer to Egypt as milk and honey, that means you only see it through your own lens, which has relevance to yourself. So we said, it says 80% of the Jews died during the days of darkness, the Mak of Choshech. Dozens of you made it out. Why did they make it out? They wanted to leave. Why did they want to leave? Because they were hoping that now they have all this newfound wealth. When they get to Eretz Yisrael, they're going to be leaders again, leaders with power. So they're going to be restored and reinstated to a powerful position, and nobody's going to tell them or dictate, and people will appreciate who they are. That's the reason why they went out. It was willing to take every risk, go into the desert, if that, because they believed ultimately they're going to arrive in Eretz Yisrael. If that's the case, we're going. What happens? All of a sudden, they realize they're not arriving. So the only reason why they agreed to leave, because they were going to have their glory restored. But now that they realize they're going to die, they're so incensed to get Moshe Rabbeinu, they cannot tolerate his existence. They feel they were so misled and so duped. And as a result of this, they said, "Oh, Nale," and that we'll see even more. They said, the only way you're going to take us out to come to get it, you're going to have to gouge out our eyes. They were so incensed. They said, you're going to have to like literally kill us to bring you to, but we're not coming under any circumstance. They could not tolerate Moshe's existence. This is the way these people spoke. We'll see. You didn't bring us to land of milk and honey. And then they said, the eyes of these people should be gouged out, should be torn out. They were saying, even if you gouge out our eyes, we're not coming. Rashi. Even on the threat that you're going to blind us, if we don't come to you, we're not coming. Under any circumstance. Could you imagine the level of hate they were expressing to Moshe Rabbeinu? the way the Balaturim explains, or the way the Sefarno explains, alludes to the same thing. They didn't mean, do you think you're going to pull the wool over our eyes any longer? Until now, you convinced us that it's going to be terrific. We're arriving. Our eyes, you're not going to blind any longer. You've blinded us long enough. You've hoodwinked us long enough. That's a tinoker. They didn't mean, Rashi cites Chazal, it's the Midrash. Even if you gouge our eyes, we're not coming. The others explain it according to the simple understanding that our eyes, you're not going to blind any longer. You've blinded, misled everybody. Us, you're not going to be able to mislead any longer. That's Eine Anoshim Tinaker. Now, we find initially Moshe dealt with with Korach. When he saw he couldn't deal with Korach, he wanted to speak to the others. Because he saw that Korach fell on deaf ears. Korach is not receptive to whatever he says. Now, if Korach has a point, and has a valid point, a basis for his mutiny, you chose your brother to be the Kohen Gadol and this and that. Once you get into a dialogue, and maybe Moshe Rabbeinu will explain to you why it's not the way you think it is. And he'll explain to you why it's the Dvar Hashem, and it's not his. That it begins with God, it does not begin with him. Korach just shut him off. He did not want to enter into a conversation with him, into this dialogue. So this unbelievable medrash. Korach, sometimes a person says, I know I'm right. And if I enter into dialogue, you're going to present your case in a way I'm not going to be able to disagree. But I know I'm right. So the medrash says, Korach, when Moshe wanted to speak to Korach says to himself, I'm not entering a conversation to this dialogue with Moshe. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu is smarter than I am. And if I enter into the dialogue, he's going to explain to me why my position is baseless. And he's right. But I know I'm right. That even though he's going to prove that he's right, but I know I'm right. Facts on the ground, Moshe's right. But as much as he says, he proves he's right, but I know I'm right. Therefore, I don't even want to talk to him. You understand? People could be so entrenched in that position, even if you explain to them differently and prove to them that position is baseless position, they don't change. The ego, not that he felt that he was slighted, that he felt that he's more worthy than all of them, would not allow him to accept, to be rational. The behavior was totally rational. Now, we mentioned the Medrash. Rashi says, why did Korach believe he'd be the lone survivor? Eino hitaso. His eye misled him, that Hashem had shown him that Shmuel HaNavi, who is the equivalent of Moshe and Aaron in a certain way, he will be a descendant of his. So if Shmuel HaNavi will be his descendant, evidently he's not dying, he will be the lone survivor. Eino hitaso. Now, factually, if he and his family, they all perished when the earth opened its mouth, so where did Shmuel come from? So we've mentioned, the Medrash says that two of Korach's sons did tshuva. Now, but what's the background on that tshuva? So the Medrash tells us that Moshe had entered into the tent of Korach to speak to him, and Korach ignored him. He had two sons sitting alongside him, one to the right of him, one to the left of him. And when Moshe entered into the tent, they had a dilemma. What was the question? Do you stand for Moshe Rabbeinu to acknowledge that he is the Torah leader of Klal Yisrael? Or no, you sit, because if we stand, we'll be sliding our father. So what should we do? Stand and disgrace our father and slide him? Or stand? They chose to stand. Moshe Rabbeinu factually is the leader of Klal Yisrael. Through him the Torah came. They stood and they acknowledged Moshe. They acknowledged Moshe. So the Medrash says, in the schus of acknowledging Moshe, Hashem allowed them to have stirrings of tshuva in their heart, and because of that, they were able to do tshuva. If they wouldn't have stood for Moshe Rabbeinu, A personal tshuva is not simple. You need a special intervention, God, to assist you to do tshuva. The reason why they merited that divine assistance is because they stood for Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, it says they had hirurei tshuva. They had stories of tshuva. And that's why they did. That's why Korach himself understood where his kids were, his children were. There's no way they're pulling out of this. You need special intervention. And especially he held he was right. Because they had done something which was exceptional, something exemplary. Despite everything, they acknowledged Moshe, they merited this intervention that they were touched to be able to do tshuva. And because of that, that's what it was a Shmuel HaNavi. And that's what the mistake he had made. He never believed his kids would ever change sides of the fence over here, but they did. There's a Tosas in Zvachim. The law is that if you bring a korban and the korban, the mizbech becomes damaged. And because of that, the process is interrupted because you have to repair the mizbech. You cannot officiate and bring a korban if the mizbech is damaged. So the Gemara says that since there's a delay in the korban is disqualified. It has to be uninterrupted. That every moment from the slaughtering on, that you should be able to bring the korban, there should be no interruption. And if there's a halachic interruption because you're not able to bring the korban because the mizbech is damaged, it's called dichoy. It's been shunned, and you have to start all over again. So the Gemara speaks about a case where the Kohen receives the blood to sprinkle, and then the blood spills on the ground in the sanctuary, and it goes to the location where it can easily be scooped up. It's called biyodo. Since it's biyodo to scoop up, it's not called dichoy. That's not called a delay. Of course, it can easily pick up the blood and just continue. So something that you could easily do and just continue, that delay is not considered a delay. So Tosei asks a question. The halacha is that if a person goes and he inadvertently eats chaylev, or inadvertently violates Shabbos, and he consecrates an animal as a chatos, he has to bring a sin offering. And after he brings the chatos, the Kohen starts officiating. After the shchit, he becomes a heretic. And to the point he says, I will violate Shabbos. So the halacha is, at that point, the korban cannot be brought any further. Because the only reason why the korban is being brought, because if he would have known, he would have violated Shabbos. It's inadvertent. But now he's taken on a position, even if he would have known, he would have violated. Because he's taken on a whole different perspective of what is and what's not. And then after he does tshuva. In this interim, he does tshuva. The Gemara says the korban is disqualified. Well, since when he became the heretic, at that moment the korban couldn't be brought, you don't continue. So Tosha asks, it's beyond the lasas tshuva. Since he could do tshuva at that moment, as he did do tshuva, so if that's the case, why is the korban disqualified? That's Tosha's question. So Tosha answers that when it comes to tshuva, it's not simple. It's not a simple thing. You need special divine assistance to tshuva. Picking up the blood easily, he could scoop it up. That's not called a delay because that you're in control. When it comes to tshuva, it's not simple. You need special merit to be able to do tshuva. As a result of that, that's considered a significant delay, and as a result of that, the korban is disqualified. So again, you see that to do tshuva, you need special intervention, divine intervention, to give you that sense to be able to carry through. Korach's children merited that intervention to allow them to do tshuva, because rather than ignoring Moshe Rabbeinu, they stood for Moshe, despite the fact that they were disgracing their father. Whenever it comes to put your ego on the line, despite you're disgracing yourself, but whatever you do for Hashem, and you're willing to compromise your persona for Hashem, you merit the greatest things. The greatest things. Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen He did his act of zealotry when he killed Zimri, who was the prince of the tribe of Shimon. You know what I meant? He was the only one who had the ability. How do you kill a prince? Where do you have the audacity? It's not simple. For Kovod Shamayim, for the sake of God's honor, he says, I mean nothing. I'm willing to give it all up for him. The whole concept of Kiddush Hashem. Person dies for Kiddush Hashem to sanctify God's name. What is that? There's nothing more valuable to a person than his life. And if you're willing to give up your life for Hashem, that's the ultimate. Because it's going against the grain. Anything we do out of the ordinary, which is not within the direction that a person's inclined, it's exceptional. The Gemara tells over a story in Brachos. The Gemara says there was a drought that hadn't rained for an extended period of time. And they prayed and prayed, nothing helped. They went to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda was known that when he would pray, Hashem would answer immediately. So the Gemara, the Mish tells us in Tainis that when things reach a very serious moment that hasn't rained extended period of time, you have to start conduct yourself like Yom Kippur. You're not permitted to eat, you're not permitted to drink, you're not permitted to wear leather shoes. That's the way you have to conduct yourself. They come to Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda takes off one shoe. You hear this? One shoe, not both shoes. He's wearing leather shoes. As he in preparation to be mispalo, to pray, he takes off one shoe. It immediately starts raining. Starts raining. Somebody asks, here Klal Yisrael's praying and doing everything under the sun. They can't invoke Rachmin. And Rabbi Yehuda, he takes off one shoe, and it starts raining already. What did Rabbi Yehuda have? Something special that he merited. He had this special relation with Hashem, even if he takes off one shoe. In preparation for tefillah, for rain, it starts raining. Why? Samar says, Mosa nafshei al kiddush Hashem. He gave his life to sanctify God's name. What's the story? Mar tells over a story. There was this woman walking in a public area, and she was wearing a red hat. That kind of red hat was such a breach in modesty for a Jewish woman. It was the ultimate breach of modesty. A woman who was a flirtatious woman who wanted men to be attracted to her, she would wear that kind of hat. So it's a pitfall for the Jewish community. And how does a Jewish woman wear that kind of hat? He went and he tore the hat off her head. You hear this? He pulled the hat off her head. He could not tolerate this breach of a lack of tznius, of modesty. You know what happened? It turned out she wasn't Jewish. Made a mistake. She wasn't a Jewish woman. So the court found him guilty of embarrassing a woman publicly, which he had no right to, and he paid a fine $400, which was considered a significant amount of money. And he said, afterwards they said, was it worth it? He says, it was worth it. Because if she was a Jewish woman, it's something which is intolerable. The Gemara says that's called Mosa Nafshei al Kiddush Hashem. That he went because he believed she was a Jewish woman, and he did that act, which is totally out of the capacity of most people. He gave his life. He sacrificed himself, sent for God's name. Therefore, as a result of that, although it's not raining, when he takes off even one shoe in preparation for rain, it starts raining. So if you do something out of the ordinary, which is against the grain, which most people are not inclined to do, although they know it's the right thing to do, but they don't do it, that's considered Mosa Nafshei Kiddush Hashem. There's a story with Rabbi Avigdor Miller that I once mentioned it. David is a big fan of listening to his tapes, David Lobel, that Rabbi Avigdor Miller, he was born in Baltimore. He went to Europe and he studied in Slobodka, came back. He was a mashgiach in Berlin. He was a rav, and he was a tremendous disseminator of Torah. And he goes to there was a dinner, and this dinner, there was a rabbi who spoke at the dinner, and he spoke from the podium. And Rav Vigdamil is sitting in the audience, and he hears this rabbi, so-called Orthodox rabbi. He starts saying things which are heretical things. So Rav Vigdamil gets up, he goes over to this rabbi and says, you realize what you're saying is heretical. You're not permitted to say it, especially you're saying it to people where they don't know, and because of who you are, they believe it. It has value. I advise you to stop. You should stop speaking. Speak about something else. This rabbi sees this older rabbi, just ignores him and just continues. Was his heretical words, and he gets up again. Rav Vigdamil goes over, whispers in his ear, and says, "I told you to stop. And if you don't stop, I will take you down." Yeah, doesn't stop. He goes up, he grabs him by the collar. Hear this? Pulls him off the podium. He can't speak any longer. How do you let him speak this? He's saying words and communicate information you're not permitted to say, and these people have been listening to it. They don't know the difference. He will not tolerate it. Let me ask you, how many of us would have done that? To go up and pull him off, that's Mosa Nafshat Kiddush Hashem. That's going against the grain. Doing something that is exemplary, out of the ordinary, and that person is seen in Hashem's eyes as a special person. Because for the sake of God, you're willing to compromise yourself. That's what it's about. Rabbi Yehuda compromised himself. That Moshe went to try to smoke this peace pipe with Dasan and Aviram, despite the history of the relationship, for the sake of peace, that there should not be machlokas. That Korach's children stood, despite the fact that it was nearly impossible to do because they'd be disgracing their father, it wasn't part of the issue. Moshe Rabbeinu is the person who brought the Torah to us. We stand for him, no matter what. No questions. What about the issues? What about your father? Plays no role whatsoever. And that merit, they merited to have stirrings of tshuva. They did tshuva. And as old as that, there was a Shmuel Navi generations later. They sacrificed for the Shabbos. In the United States, there were times we mentioned that if a person would not work on Shabbos, Friday, the boss, the employee would say to the employee, the Jew, "Are you coming?" And on Shabbos, the man would say, "No, he's not coming." He paid him his wage for whatever he worked for that week. He says, "Don't come back." And people went for weeks without work because it was very difficult to find work if you didn't work on Shabbos. But they were, relatively speaking, a handful of Jews. Most Jews did work on Shabbos. It was too difficult for them to meet this challenge, but there were a handful who did. And every one of those Jews who sacrificed for Shabbos, their descendants are the B'nai Torah and the disseminators Torah in the United States today. I'm not talking about people who come from European backgrounds. People, parents, grandparents, great word in America, and they did not work on Shabbos despite the difficulties, and they sacrificed for that. Their grandchildren merited a special shmira, a divine protection, that their children are still are Jews. They did not assimilate, and not only that, they became B'nai Torah. Not only B'nai Torah, they became there were positions of influence to influence others to continue to disseminate Torah disseminators. In the merit that their great grandparents sacrificed for Shabbos. Vayicha l'Moshe Mod. Rashi only explains the word Vayicha. It doesn't mean he was enraged. Nitztayr ad l'Mod. He was pained to his core. When he saw that position, that they were at a place of no return, he was pained. Because this is a Chil Hashem that he realizes cannot be corrected. as a result of these people changing their position. These people are so entrenched, they're not changing. Many years ago, I heard from Steiner, he asked the question, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin that Nebuchadnezzar, who was the Babylonian emperor who destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, and he exiled the Jews to Bavel, he was such a tyrant. The Gemara says in Shabbos that when he went to Gehenna, and the people were in Gehenna meet him, they say, we thought we escaped your clutches. You're coming to Gehenna to be with us. We've had enough of you. This is how evil he was. That's what kind of tyrant he was. So Merces in Sanhedrin that Nebuchadnezzar started to sing the praises of Hashem to the point it was going to surpass the praises of David in Tehillim. Hashem sends Gabriel, the archangel, to silence him. And he couldn't continue. So the obvious question is, if Nebuchadnezzar is going to surpass David, why did Hashem silence him? So, because he's going to make David look bad. Factually, his praises are surpassing David's praises. So Steinman said that if his praises are so exceptional, he has to reward him. What's going to be the reward to Nebuchadnezzar? What's going to be the reward? He'll extend his reign. To give him Olam Haba, Nebuchadnezzar is not interested in Olam Haba. He's not interested in that. And God's not interested in that. So what we do, we extend his life. Extend his reign. Extending his reign, what's the consequence of that? That means people are going to suffer to a greater degree. There could be more people who will be victimized due to his cruelty as an emperor. So Hashem didn't want that to happen. That's why he silenced him. That was Rav Steinman's answer. That's why he did not allow him to continue. Dasan Viram from day one were bad guys. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, as bad as they are, Hashem is allowing them to continue. One after another, very serious breaches. And yet Hashem allows them. And Hashem doesn't take them out. Evidently, why? Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand why. Evidently, because maybe at the end of the day, they're going to change. And they'll become good Jews. Because the level of Chil Hashem these guys are bringing about, there must be some value, there must be a silver lining in this black cloud. And the light at the end of the tunnel, Moshe doesn't see, but it must be there. Otherwise, why is Hashem tolerating this? When it reaches this point here, where the attack is against the authenticity of Torah, and Moshe has left no stone unturned, Moshe says, this is it. And now Moshe's pain to his core, he understands they have to be destroyed. And that's what it speaks about. The Karban Tzibur, that every person has a share in, their share should not be accepted. And the earth should open its mouth and swallow them. Now, finally, whatever it was supposed to prove, as we said, the whole story of Korach was to prove the authenticity of Torah. And Korach and Dozaviram, they were the key players, would ultimately confirmed Moshe Emes Torah so Emes. Because after all his attempts to convince them to make peace, they weren't willing. That was the confirmation. The end has come. Now we have to end it. It's the same thing. He understood. He didn't. What's the value? But the value must, because ultimately they're going to change. But now it's clear they're not changing. And what's at risk now? At risk is the Torah itself. If that's the case, the value is that they should be destroyed. And that's why right now he's praying that they should be destroyed. Okay, we're going to say the halacha.
So, Rabbi,